Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Well, we are in the last module of this particular course, Building Materials and Composites. We have gone through many different kinds of materials, and we last finished on damp proofing, insulation and composites. We are left with a very important finish material, which is paint. And the other important is plastics. So, this module we are keeping on paints and plastics, and we will begin with paints, because plastics is independent of maybe paints. Why? Plastics do not require a paint on top of it. But many other materials, whatever we came through, more or less require a coating or protective coating on top of it, and that we collectively call as paints. Yes, paints, varnishes, distempers, etc. Maybe you are exposed to these terms, and whatever paint which we put inside a building may not be applicable outside a building, because inside it is dry, outside it is facing the weather. Now, surfaces are again of different kinds. You may have a plastered wall, you may have exposed brick wall, you may have a concrete facade, you may have wooden elements, you may have metals. So, we have come across basically all these kind of items. So, we need to cover them, otherwise most of these are having organic components, ingredients. Say it brick, it is made from silica, sand, clay. Again, if you think of concrete, all the ingredients are made from again earth. By different methods we have gone through those. Coming to wood, it is direct application of an organic item. And metals, they have, yes, their own particular mechanism which aluminium does. It has a coating on top of it, oxidation. So, aluminium usually does not require a paint, but yes, you can, but other ferrous metals you usually apply paints to make it or keep it free from corrosion. So, if we ask what is paint, we have to learn what is the purpose of paint. We have to know when to call a paint a good paint, composition and functions of the ingredients, what makes a paint, and maybe as we learned most of the materials, we will just go through the steps of manufacturing paint. So, if we come to the basic question, what is paint? It is a solution or a suspension which, after application to a substrate, that is the material onto which it is applied, in a thin layer converts to a solid film. So, this substrate may be wood, may be metal, may be plastered wall, may be concrete, may be even brick. So, we have a thin layer which converts into a solid film. So, obviously there is some material which helps it to become solid and to get applied when it is in a thin layer. How thick is a layer of paint or the film of paint? It is around 60 to 150 micron. So you have to understand that the solid film is made of certain particles which are at most maximum 150 micron in dimension. So how many layers are to be put? We start with 2 layers and we can go up to 4. Usually 2 to 3 coats are mandatory. Now that also depends on what is the type of substrate. We will elaborate them little gradually. We enter into the thing. Why we put multiple coats? Because we are trying to hide the material, because you cannot see a painted layer and say what is behind it. If you can see what is behind it, there is no point of putting a paint. So it can hide the imperfections, it can save it from the weathering action, which we will talk later. But basic primary purpose is multiple layer is to hide the surface imperfections. So when you see the layer, it should be only the color or only the layer you want to see with a very uniform distribution without any breaks or gaps. How much can 1 liter of paint cover? Usually 10 to 12 square meters, but it depends on other factors. So it has to be of correct consistency. The substrate should be such that it does not absorb the entire thing. So we will discuss when we go into the further details, but usually it is 10 to 12 square meters done by 1 liter of standard paint. So what is the purpose of putting the paint? As I told you, one was hiding the surface imperfection. But what are the other major purposes? It provides a coating to the building surface for protection against weathering action. Who are the enemies? Sun, the ultraviolet rays, the rain. So you need an impervious layer. Mechanical stresses, heat. Within the changes, thermal changes, the paint should be elastic enough to take care of such thermal changes. So these mechanical stresses are to be taken care. Chemical actions, one is corrosion, other is some alkaline medium, acid fumes. Your building cover should take care of these kind of actions. So paint is protecting, hence it should be inert against chemicals, it should be inert against corrosion, it should be inert against thermal stresses. So expansion, contraction, that is elasticity of it should be such that it is not getting affected. It should not get affected by ultraviolet rays, so the color should remain intact. Now it should protect all surfaces against organic growths, termites, fungal attacks, wood or brick, both. You see the two pictures. The green moss has grown on the exposed brick wall and same with the wood surface. So you have to give a coating or a cover to these surfaces so that no such growth is allowed. provides aesthetic value, be it building interior or exterior. So, you can see the interior of a house picture with a blue shaded wall. So, you can create your background for your furniture, you can create different moods inside the house. So, when you go for interior design course or class for the subject, you will see how to give different colors of paints inside of the house. Now, paint increases the surface durability and also can give fire protection. Fire protection mostly I refer to when it is metal surfaces. It is also giving fire protection for building facades. So, we can impart such characteristics to paints so that you get fire protection. It adds functionality. We had learned this when we did reflective paint, insulation, reflective materials as insulators. So, you have reflective paint, white paint, metallic paint on rooftops. You allow the heat to get reflected back, and paints gives identity. You see the fire lines all painted red. So, you have oxygen lines in hospitals, you have air conditioning ducts, you have these fire service lines, you have different gas lines, you have different oil lines, all get an identity. There are standard colors, codes which are to be followed. As we see yellow buses for the school bus, that was once decided across the country. So, that gives the color gives the identity. Particularly for building industry, we are talking of paints giving identity to the services, the gas lines for hospitals, for firefightings. So, one can easily access the point by the use of appropriate color. Now, coming to the characteristics of good paint. When we are talking of paint, we all have done some amount of artwork in our childhood. So, there you use watercolor, you mix some color in a bowl and create your palette, and you keep on making green for the grass and sky, etc., etc. But the painting scores the good mark when you get uniform or identifiable objects color schemes. So, uniformly it has to be done, it should have uniform spread. When we are thinking of a building, the jacket should not be a patchy one. So, it should be very uniformly spreaded on the entire surface. It should have high surface coverage. So, that means what I had talked of, the amount of paint required to cover say 10 to 12 square meters per liter, that means that is the coverage. More you can cover, what will happen? The layer will be thinner. 60 to 150 micron is a big range. So, the paint will be thinner because you are going to add another layer on top of it, again another layer on top of it. So, what is eventually happening? It becomes, if it is very thick, then it can come out very easily. So, you have to think of how thin one can adhere, one layer can adhere on top of the other. So, high surface coverage is very important. Then we come to the point of good workability. You and me cannot do a painting job, particularly when it is a large expanse of wall. You have to have control. Maybe with a paintbrush you can have a control, but when it is a big large surface, it should be the workman's skill and the fluidity of the paint that will help in having or achieving good workability. We came to this term through this term workability when we did concrete. So you have to spread that concrete with all its mix uniformly without any void. Similarly, here you have to pass the ingredients within the paint, which are not as crude as concrete but very fine, across the entire wall to get that uniform spread and uniform coverage, thin coating. Yes, the next point is durability. It should be long lasting. Elastic property, as I have told you, to stand differences in temperature, weather conditions, etc. Paints should also give water tightness. So if there is a visible break in the paint layer, it will allow water to enter and damage. So this impervious to air and water is important because those are the slow poisons or enemies and that can attack the main structure. So particularly the external facades should have one should be very particular in looking into this imperviousness characteristic of the paint. Further, paint should be cheap and economical, easy to procure and protect surface for longer duration of time, because it is not a very easy job to keep on painting building now and then. Particularly buildings which are public in nature, there is a program, say every 5 years, 10 years you actually repaint it. So it is very important to remember that you have to have a protective surface which should also be cheap and economical for people to buy and use, because that is a protector. This layer is a protective coating for the entire building from any kind of damages which we discussed just in my previous slide. Now let us come to the composition of paint. You see two words written here, base and the vehicle. What is base? Base is the basic material. What is vehicle? We call a vehicle which is a carrier that will carry the base on the top of the substrate. So the vehicle is the carrier of the base. So the vehicle is the carrier of the base. Now if we come to what is this base comprised of? Base is comprised of principle and the pigment. Principle is the component which is in all the paints of same nature, similar nature, but the pigment is the coloring agent added to it. So base is obviously, as I told you in the previous slide, it should be cheap And here I had mentioned this when we did non-ferrous metals. Lead was extensively used, lead oxide was extensively used as base, which kept the cost of paint very economical or cheap. But because of health hazards of this lead oxide, the use of lead in the base has been stopped. So, we use zinc oxide, zinc carbonate, iron oxide, titanium oxide, these as bases, and yes, the cost has gone little high. But if we could have continued with lead, we could have got cheaper paints, but at the cost of health hazards. So, when paint is left to stand too long, what happens? This principle or the base segregates because they may be in suspension. So, you need to stir the material always. So, where this base goes? This base goes into the vehicle or the carrier. So, this base actually saves the surface against cracking, moisture, ultraviolet rays, because that is the major part which is visible. What you see is actually the base and the pigment or the coloring agent. Now, what are these pigments? The pigments are the coloring agents which are mineral powders. It may be mica, it may be aluminium. When it is aluminium, we say it is aluminium paint. These may be organic substances also. They are in dimension 0.1 to 5 micrometer. So, these pigments hides the surface imperfection. So, the base is being carried by the vehicle along with these pigments which are hiding the surface imperfections, and the fineness of the pigments reinforces the paint film. So, finer the pigment size or these base and the pigment sizes, more tightly or closely packed they are, and the paint is becoming more impervious. So, it strengthens the size. Lower the size, the stronger is the paint film, better is the quality. So, that again I just spell out here, like you have silk emulsion, you have velvet touch. More fine it is, more costly it is, more durable it is. We will discuss that in some other lecture. So, this pigment, the base or the principle and the coloring agents together holds the entire thing, or actually forms the layer which is visible to us. Now, coming to the vehicle or the binder, and along with it we add the thinner. So, what is the binder? Binder is one which binds the principles and the pigments, that is the base, together to form the continuous hard film. So, when the paint dries, the vehicle evaporates and binds the base particles to the surface of the substrate. What is it? Glue, linseed oil, synthetic resins, alkyds, acrylic, vinyl, polyurethanes, these all can form the binder. We say glue size. Linseed oil is the most commonly used binder. So, binder or the vehicle is the carrier, but apart from the binder, if we keep on adding more of binder, the cost goes high. So, when you are working with it, you can add the thinner, which is the solvent or the carrier, and it usually is volatile in nature and also termed as volatile organic compounds or VOC. It is also to be limited because these organic compounds which evolve carbon are also not healthy. Petroleum, spirit, naphtha, turpentine, all these are solvents or carriers or thinners. We will discuss at length, yes, water is also a thinner. Now, apart from these two basic things, we have additives which reduce the cost. We had learnt adulterants in concrete also. We could add them to reduce in low percentage to reduce the cost. Here also you add additives to get different properties, of which one is reducing the cost without affecting the other properties. So, these are added to paints to increase the bulk, that is increase the base, without affecting the useful properties of the paint. So, chalk, gypsum, bariate, which is barium sulfate, silica, magnesium silicate, these all can go as additives, these all can go as adulterants, which are additives. The other is the plasticizers or dryers. So, these can be added up to 3%, helps in the oxidation process or condensation process of the vehicle. And if you add excess of it, the paint may break or flake out. What happened in mode of plasticizers in concrete? It had gone for segregation. Here also, if you add plasticizers more in amount, you will get it will flake out. So, plasticizers are added to modify surface tension, to improve some flow property, to improve the finish appearance or give the stability. So, these four items, basically the base, the vehicle, the adulterants and the dryers, together form the paint. Once we have gone through these are the basic ingredients, we come to the steps of manufacturing of paint. So, when we are talking of manufacturing of paint, we have to mix all these ingredients in known proportion, and that becomes the first step, that is batching. So, you are bringing all these materials in fixed proportion into the grinding mill, which is a kind of mortar and pestle where you grind the basic items with very measured amount of vehicle or binder into it. To be precise, binder, not vehicle, binder into it. It's just like grinding masala, making masala paste. So, what happens? the particles are getting further reduced in size, and then they are passed into the thinning tank where the solvent is added to get the desired consistency. So, that is step 3, where you are doing the thinning and going for quality check, so that you are getting the desired consistency of the paint. Now, you need to keep the entire thing agitated. As you see in the ready mix concrete, you are carrying concrete with the agitation or a vibration that was not to allow segregation. Here also you are agitating not to allow segregation of base from the binder and the thinner, or the collectively the vacuum. So, once you are keeping it agitated, it is not separating out, and when there is order placed, you only then tap it out and pack it. So, until it is being packed, until it is order is placed, you are not packing it, because once you pack it, you cannot agitate it. So, once the order is placed, the packaging is done and sent to the store. We will thus move to our next lecture. So, thank you.